The night sky over Earth was supposed to be a calm, familiar sight, but on that fateful evening, everything changed. Without warning, a shimmering ripple cascaded across the stars, cutting through the fabric of space itself. For a few moments, the planets in the solar system were bathed in a strange, unnatural glow. But then, as quickly as it came, the light vanished, leaving an impenetrable darkness in its wake. At first, the world's astronomers and scientists dismissed the phenomenon as a cosmic anomaly. It was nothing more than an unusual solar flare or a temporary disturbance in the space-time continuum. But when the first reports came in from deep space stations and colonies scattered across the galaxy, the terrifying truth became undeniable. The darkness wasn't just some fleeting event. It was something alive, something malevolent. Entire colonies, once thriving with human activity, fell silent. Communication from distant outposts ceased. Planets once brimming with light and life were now cloaked in an endless, suffocating night. Even Earth satellites, built to monitor every inch of the planet, began to malfunction as the darkness spread. Power grids failed, cities went dark, and the once predictable rhythms of life were shattered. The Shadowborn had arrived. The first signs of their existence were subtle at first. In the darkened corners of abandoned colonies, strange figures were spotted, their glowing eyes barely visible in the shadows. When a rescue team from Earth arrived on one such colony, they found it deserted, except for the ominous traces of something far more sinister. Walls were covered in a black, oily substance, and the air was thick with an unnatural cold. As they ventured deeper into the station, they encountered the first of the Shadowborn, creatures that seemed to melt into the darkness itself, their forms ever-shifting and nightmarish, as though the very shadows had taken on physical form. The soldiers who came to investigate were overwhelmed, their weapons useless against the creatures, and their screams were swallowed by the endless blackness. Humanity's first encounter with the Shadowborn left more questions than answers. Where had they come from? How had they arrived so suddenly, without warning? No one knew, but one thing was certain: Earth and its colonies were under siege, and this was only the beginning. Back on Earth, government officials scrambled to coordinate a response. The United Nations, along with the newly formed Galactic Defense Coalition, convened an emergency meeting. The leaders of the world's major powers debated frantically over how to fight an enemy that seemed to thrive in the dark. The truth was, no one was prepared. The Shadowborn weren't just an external threat. They were an existential one that challenged everything humanity knew about warfare, survival, and even the very laws of nature. But the people of Earth were not easily broken. In the midst of the growing panic, a collective resolve began to form. Despite the fear, the unknowns, and the terror that gripped the population, the survivors began to organize. Military units were mobilized. Scientists, engineers, and brilliant minds came together to develop any weapon that could potentially drive the darkness back. What the Shadowborn lacked in physical form, humanity would make up for with ingenuity and grit. In the midst of the chaos, as entire cities were consumed by the growing void, a quiet determination began to spread. Humanity's struggle against the dark had just begun, and they would not go quietly into that night. As the months passed, Earth's people grew accustomed to the constant, eerie presence of the darkness. Cities had become silent, their streets abandoned, their structures standing like hollowed-out shells. The lights that once illuminated bustling metropolises flickered out one by one. Global communication was fractured, leaving governments and civilians stranded in isolation. Every day, the shadow seemed to inch closer, swallowing everything in its path. And yet, amid the despair, humanity's resilience began to shine through. In the wake of the global panic, a new alliance formed, a union of military leaders, scientists, and engineers from Earth and its colonies. This united front, dubbed the Earth Coalition, set its sights on one goal: survival. The coalition gathered its finest minds to develop strategies, weapons, and technologies that could turn the tide against the Shadowborn. For the first time in years, the world's fractured nations came together, their individual conflicts set aside in the face of a common enemy. At the heart of this new movement stood Dr. Evelyn Voss, an astrophysicist whose groundbreaking research into light manipulation had once been considered fringe theory. When the Shadowborn first attacked, her work was dismissed as speculative. But as the darkness spread and conventional methods failed, her theories became humanity's last hope. Voss believed that light, pure, concentrated light, was the key to driving the Shadowborn back, and perhaps even destroying them entirely. Using her research, she and a team of engineers designed a prototype weapon, a massive, mobile light cannon capable of unleashing concentrated pulses of pure energy, enough to cut through the dense darkness. While Voss worked tirelessly on refining her weapon, the Earth Coalition shifted its focus to establishing a line of defense against the Shadowborn's invasion. The Shadowborn, terrifying as they were not without weaknesses. They were vulnerable to concentrated light and heat, and there were certain frequencies of light that could disorient them. The Coalition rapidly began developing new armor and weapons, including suits that emitted constant pulses of light, creating protective barriers around soldiers. But there was no time for trial and error. Humanity needed results, and fast. The first major operation to push back the Shadowborn was launched from a hidden military base located in the Arctic. The operation was dubbed Phoenix, symbolizing humanity's determination to rise from the ashes. It would be the largest joint offensive to date, a multi-pronged assault aimed at reclaiming one of the outer colonies that had fallen to the Shadowborn. The goal was simple: hit them where it hurt and send a message to the galaxy. Humanity was not giving up without a fight. The battle for the colony was brutal. The Shadowborn, their figures creeping out from the blackness like smoke, seemed to be everywhere. Their forms twisted unnaturally, appearing as though they were part of the very shadows that cloaked them. The human forces, armed with newly developed light-emitting weapons, were at a disadvantage in the beginning. The creatures adapted quickly, using the dark to their advantage, melting into it, making them almost impossible to target. But the Coalition had a secret weapon, Dr. Voss's light cannon. When the cannon was finally deployed, it was like a new dawn breaking through the darkness. A blinding beam of light shot across the sky, obliterating everything in its path. The Shadowborn shrieked, their forms disintegrating under the intensity of the light. For the first time in months, the humans could see the stars again, but it wasn't enough. The beam only pushed the creatures back, it didn't destroy them entirely. The battle was far from over. Despite the victory, the humans knew that they had only won a small skirmish in a much larger war. The darkness was still spreading, and the Shadowborn were learning, evolving, adapting. But in the hearts of humanity's defenders, a flicker of hope remained. The first victory had been won, and now they had a weapon that could take the fight to the heart of the enemy. The battle had begun, and the Shadowborn would soon learn that humanity would not go down without a fight. After the success of the Phoenix operation, humanity's resolve grew stronger. The Earth Coalition recognized that they had only delayed the inevitable. The Shadowborn were not going to be easily defeated. The darkness continued to spread across the galaxy, and the creatures that emerged from it seemed to multiply, their abilities evolving in terrifying ways. The time had come to take the fight to the very heart of the threat, the source of the darkness itself. Dr. Evelyn Voss and her team worked around the clock, studying the remnants of the artifact they had discovered at the space station in the Outer Rim. The ancient alien structure had been nothing like anything humanity had encountered before. It was a monument to an unknown race, seemingly designed to harness and control the power of darkness itself. Within the station, the massive crystal that powered the Shadowborn was unlike any energy source known to humanity. It pulsed with an unnatural frequency, filling the air with a hum that resonated deep in the bones of anyone who stood near it. The more they studied the artifact, the clearer it became. The Shadowborn were not simply a monstrous species awakened by some cosmic event. They were connected to this ancient structure, drawing their power from it. The crystal at the heart of the station was a conduit, a dark gateway between dimensions that allowed the Shadowborn to manifest in this reality. And if they didn't destroy it, the darkness would continue to spread, and humanity would be forever under siege. The Coalition's top military strategist, General Marcus Riker, was tasked with assembling a team to destroy the artifact and cut off the Shadowborn's link to the universe. Riker knew that the operation would be a suicide mission. The space station was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by a near-impenetrable web of Shadowborn forces. Yet, despite the odds, the general remained confident. If humanity could break through and destroy the artifact, the creatures would lose their power. They would be driven back into the shadows where they belonged. A team of elite soldiers, led by Captain Naya Hale, was chosen for the mission. Hale was a decorated war hero, known for her unyielding determination and tactical brilliance. Alongside her were Dr. Voss and several engineers who had helped develop the light-based weapons. The team's objective was simple: infiltrate the space station, plant charges on the artifact, and destroy it. But with the Shadowborn adapting and learning from every battle, it wouldn't be simple. The soldiers would have to fight through the shadows themselves, and even with their advanced technology, there was no guarantee they would survive. As the operation began, the soldiers approached the space station from a covert location on a nearby asteroid. The darkness that surrounded the station was unlike anything they had encountered before. The eerie, oppressive feeling was overwhelming, as though the shadows themselves were alive, watching, waiting. The team's light-based weapons pulsed faintly in the dark, a fragile barrier between them and the encroaching terror. Every step they took was met with the sense that they were being hunted, that the shadows themselves were closing in on them. When they boarded the station, the silence was deafening. The halls were dark and empty, but it didn't take long for the first signs of the Shadowborn to appear. Their glowing eyes flickered in the dark, and the sound of their distorted, whispering voices echoed through the walls. The creatures had learned to manipulate shadows, creating illusions and phantasms that were designed to break the minds of the intruders. But Captain Hale's team was trained for this, and they fought back with precision, using their light-based weapons to push the Shadowborn into retreat. The deeper they moved into the station, the more oppressive the darkness became. The team reached the central chamber, where the artifact pulsed with a malevolent glow. The crystal towered over them, its energy filling the room with an overwhelming hum. But as they prepared to plant the explosives, something unexpected happened. The crystal's glow flickered, and the shadows in the room twisted, coiling like snakes, forming into monstrous shapes that leaped toward the team. It was a trap. The Shadowborn had anticipated their arrival. The team fought valiantly, but the creatures were relentless, attacking from every angle. With the crystal's energy growing stronger, the station itself seemed to fight against them, its walls warping and shifting in the darkness. Time was running out. Captain Hale and Dr. Voss knew that the success of the mission now depended on a single desperate move. The charges had to be set, or the darkness would consume them all. As the battle raged, a breakthrough came. Dr. Voss, in a moment of clarity, realized the true nature of the artifact. It wasn't just a power source, it was a living entity, a connection between the Shadowborn and the universe. If they destroyed it, they would not only sever the connection, but also send a shockwave of energy that could push the creatures back into the void. But in doing so, they risked everything: the station, their lives, and humanity's last hope. Captain Hale made the call. They would destroy it, no matter the cost. With a final, blinding flash of light, the team set the charges. The countdown began. The moment the charges detonated, the entire space station seemed to implode in on itself. A burst of brilliant white light erupted, flooding the chamber where the artifact had stood, and in an instant, the Shadowborn shrieked in agony, their forms dissolving under the intensity of the energy. The artifact cracked, splintering like glass, sending out shockwaves that reverberated through the station's halls. The ground shook violently as the crystal, now shattered into countless pieces, released a wave of blinding light, so powerful that it pushed the creatures back, tearing the fabric of their very existence apart. But the victory came at a great cost. The station began to collapse, the walls of dark energy buckling under the strain of the explosion. The team barely managed to escape, sprinting through the crumbling corridors as the station's gravity systems failed, and the Shadowborn's shrieking wails echoed through the halls. Captain Naya Hale led the charge, her heart pounding as she fought against the panic rising in her chest. Behind her, the team scrambled to escape the collapsing station, their weapons still crackly with energy from the light-based tech. When they finally made it to the escape pods and launched into the void of space, the last thing they saw was the space station imploding, a final burst of light, sending a shockwave rippling across the galaxy. The artifact was gone. For a moment, the team felt a flicker of triumph. They had succeeded. The heart of the darkness had been destroyed, and humanity had taken a significant step toward reclaiming their galaxy. But as the days passed, the full scope of their actions became clear. The Shadowborn were not as easily defeated as they had hoped. The darkness still spread, and though the connection between the Shadowborn and the artifact had been severed, the creatures themselves were not completely wiped out. They had merely been scattered, like ashes blown by the wind. Worse still, they had learned. The creatures began to adapt to the new threat, evolving their abilities in response to the light-based weapons humanity had developed. They no longer merely hid in the shadows. Now they could manipulate light itself, turning it into weapons of their own. Entire battalions of soldiers were wiped out in the span of minutes, their weapons ineffective against the creatures who could now slip in and out of reality, their bodies flickering like distorted images in a malfunctioning hologram. Humanity had made a powerful enemy, one that was relentless, ever-changing, and ever-evolving. And now it was clear the war was far from over. Back on Earth, the Earth Coalition prepared for the next phase of the conflict. General Marcus Riker convened with military leaders, strategists, and engineers to discuss their next move. With the Shadowborn adapting so rapidly, there was no room for hesitation. Riker knew that humanity's best chance lay in outsmarting the enemy. The Shadowborn thrived in the dark, but they had become increasingly vulnerable to light. The key was to develop more advanced weapons, but also to strike at the Shadowborn's central hive, the source of their command. A team of scientists and military officers was dispatched to study the remnants of the artifact's energy signature, hoping to find clues that could lead them to the heart of the Shadowborn's forces. In parallel, human forces were fortified, and a new offensive was planned. This time, they wouldn't be aiming at an artifact. They would be targeting the creatures themselves, driving them back from the planets they had overtaken. But as they geared up for this new campaign, a shocking discovery was made. One of the Coalition's top operatives, a trusted ally, had been compromised. The Shadowborn had infiltrated their ranks. A subtle, insidious force, the creatures now had agents within human society, pulling strings, sabotaging missions, and feeding false intelligence to the resistance. The battle for humanity's survival had reached a new level. The war was no longer just against the shadows that hunted them. It was against the very trust they had built within their own ranks. The Shadowborn had learned not only to thrive in darkness, but to manipulate the light of their enemies, sowing discord among those who sought to destroy them. With a traitor in their midst, humanity's fight had become even more complicated, and the shadow over their future grew ever darker. The discovery of the Shadowborn infiltrator was a devastating blow to the Earth Coalition. A leak in the ranks meant that the creatures, ever adaptable, had learned to blend in with humanity, turning their own trust against them. The operative, known as Commander Elias Trent, was a decorated war hero and once a staunch ally of General Marcus Riker. To learn that he was a traitor was almost unfathomable. It shattered the coalition's sense of security, and suspicion crept into every corner of the resistance. Riker was forced to act quickly. He called for an immediate purge of the compromised sections of the military, but the damage had already been done. Shadowborn agents, though few in number, had sabotaged key missions and redirected precious resources, making every move of the coalition now suspect. A series of high-profile attacks, including the destruction of a crucial supply route, left entire battalions stranded and unable to regroup. Even more chilling, the Shadowborn had somehow gained knowledge of humanity's advanced light-based technology, adapting to it at an alarming rate. Captain Naya Hale and Dr. Evelyn Voss, now both shaken by the betrayal, were forced into a tense collaboration. Hale, haunted by the lives lost in the Phoenix operation, now found herself unable to trust even her closest allies. Voss, who had poured her heart into the weapon that had given humanity a glimpse of victory, was grappling with the consequences of their reliance on it. The Shadowborn were too adaptable. The light-based weapons, which had once driven them back, were now ineffective against the creature's ever-evolving tactics. To make matters worse, the Shadowborn had begun to attack humanity's most precious asset, its hope. They struck in the heart of Earth's colonies, targeting population centers and civilian habitats. It wasn't just the military that was in danger. Entire cities were falling, their inhabitants being consumed by the encroaching dark. While the soldiers fought to contain the creature's assault, the general public was left terrified and vulnerable, uncertain of who or what to trust. The coalition was running out of time. Earth's resources were quickly dwindling as Shadowborn forces overran key industrial hubs. The fight for survival had become a brutal race against the clock. In the midst of this chaos, a quiet message arrived, intercepted by Voss's team. The source is on Talos Prime. It was all the information they had, but it was enough to ignite a new plan. Talos Prime was a remote planet on the fringe of the galaxy, a place where few humans had ventured. It was also rumored to hold an ancient structure, one that, according to cryptic records, could provide the key to eradicating the Shadowborn once and for all. The message seemed too important to be a trap, but after the betrayal within their ranks, nothing could be trusted. Riker, however, saw no other choice but to act. The Earth Coalition prepared for its most dangerous mission yet, a mission to discover the truth about Talos Prime and, if the rumors were true, put an end to the Shadowborn threat once and for all. Captain Hale led a covert task force comprising the best soldiers, scientists, and engineers the Coalition could assemble. The risks were high. The Shadowborn had grown bolder, more vicious, and were already converging on Talos Prime. But Hale's team had no choice. It was a final gambit, a desperate move to turn the tide. The journey to Talos Prime was filled with uncertainty. No one knew what they would find, or if the ancient structure would even exist. As the fleet neared the planet's atmosphere, the first signs of the Shadowborn presence became evident. There was a swirling cloud of darkness, far larger than any the humans had encountered before, engulfing the planet like a living thing. The war, it seemed, was no longer just a battle against a species. It was a fight against the very fabric of reality itself. With no other option, Hale made the call. The assault on Talos Prime was about to begin, and humanity's last hope lay in the hands of those brave enough to enter the heart of the Shadowborn's domain. If they failed, there would be nothing left to save. But if they succeeded, they might just find the key to ending the darkness forever. The fleet descended toward Talos Prime, a grim silence hanging over the soldiers and scientists aboard the ships. The planet below was a swirling mass of shadows, the storm of darkness far more intense than anything humanity had yet faced. It seemed as though the very atmosphere had been corrupted, the air thick with an oppressive weight that made it hard to breathe. The Shadowborn, like a living shroud, surrounded the planet, and every inch of space seemed to be swallowed by the darkness. This was no longer just an enemy, it was a force of nature, a malevolent entity that defied all understanding. Captain Naya Hale stood at the helm of the lead assault vessel, her face grim and resolute. The rest of the fleet followed in formation, their shields glowing faintly as they entered the darkened atmosphere. The mission had only one objective: reach the ancient structure rumored to lie deep within the planet's surface and uncover its secrets. But every inch closer to the surface brought with it an overwhelming sense of dread. The Shadowborn knew they were coming. "We can't turn back now," Hale muttered to herself, though her voice was firm. "This is the last chance we have." Dr. Evelyn Voss, now a key member of the assault team, was glued to her console, scanning for any signs of anomalies in the environment. Her mind raced with questions about the ancient structure. If it truly held the key to destroying the Shadowborn, why had they not used it before? And if it did, why had no one else discovered it? She couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into a trap. But there was no alternative. The fleet touched down on the surface of Talis Prime, the landing sites chosen strategically in areas where the darkness seemed less dense, though it was clear the planet had been long abandoned. As the doors of the assault vessels opened, the soldiers were met with a cold, alien wind that swept through the barren landscape. The ground beneath them was cracked and lifeless, the air filled with an eerie, unnatural hum. There was no sign of life, at least not human life. But the presence of the Shadowborn was palpable. It loomed in the air, in every shadow, in every crack of the earth itself. "Stay alert," Hale ordered as her team disembarked. "We're not alone." They began to move quickly, their boots crunching over the desolate ground. The map they had obtained from the intercepted message led them toward a mountain range in the distance, a place where the ancient structure was said to lie hidden. The journey was long and fraught with danger. As they approached the mountains, strange distortions in the air began to appear, ripples of energy that seemed to warp reality itself. The darkness here was more active, twisting and shifting unnaturally. "Something's wrong," muttered one of the soldiers, his voice tense. "It's like the shadows are alive." At that moment, the first wave of Shadowborn emerged from the darkened fissures in the ground. Their forms were more grotesque than ever, shifting through the darkness as if it were their natural element. But something was different about them. They were faster, smarter, and seemingly more attuned to the planet's energy. It was as if the planet itself had become a conduit for their power, feeding them, empowering them. Without warning, the creatures lunged at the team, their glowing eyes piercing the shadows like fiery beacons. The soldiers fired their light-based weapons, but the beams cut through the air only to be absorbed by the creatures' shadowy forms, dissipating before they could make contact. The Shadowborn were learning from their encounters with humanity's technology, adapting in real time. "Get to the structure," Hale shouted as she fired her rifle, blasting a wave of light at the creatures that lunged too close. "We need to reach the source." With no time to lose, the team pressed forward, moving as fast as they could toward the mountain range, the Shadowborn hot on their heels. The creatures were relentless, closing the distance with terrifying speed. The air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to close in around them, as if the planet itself were pushing back, preventing them from reaching their goal. Then, as they neared the entrance to the ancient structure, a bright flash of light split the sky. It wasn't from their weapons, it came from the heart of the mountain. The entrance, once hidden, now lay open, bathed in a pulsing light that fought back the darkness like a beacon. "This is it," Dr. Voss cried, "the heart of the storm." But just as they prepared to enter, the ground trembled beneath them. A massive Shadowborn creature, unlike anything they had encountered before, emerged from the depths of the mountain. It towered over them, its form a grotesque mix of darkness and light. an embodiment of the very chaos they had come to destroy. The battle for the future of humanity would now be decided at the heart of the storm, where light and shadow clashed in a final desperate confrontation. It was clear that the Shadowborn were no longer just enemies. They were the embodiment of the darkness itself, and the only way to defeat them would be to confront the source of that darkness head-on. The massive Shadowborn creature towered over the team, its form twisting and flickering as it emerged from the heart of the mountain. It was a terrifying sight, its body a fluid mass of shifting shadows, tendrils of darkness that extended like claws. Its eyes glowed with an eerie, malevolent light, and its presence seemed to bend reality itself, warping the air around it. The ground trembled as it took a step forward, the very earth beneath their feet crackling with the energy of its dark power. Captain Naya Hale's team stood at the precipice, weapons drawn and ready, but the sight before them was unlike anything they had ever faced. The creature wasn't just a force of nature, it was the living embodiment of the planet's darkness, a twisted amalgamation of everything that had been corrupted and consumed by the Shadowborn. "Fall back," Hale shouted, but there was no room to retreat. The mountain was now a battlefield, the structure that had once held the key to humanity's survival now surrounded by the darkness. There was no choice but to face this creature head-on. The mission had always been clear: destroy the source of the Shadowborn's power, and this creature was their source. "Everyone, get to cover," Hale barked. The soldiers quickly scattered, positioning themselves strategically as they fired their light-based weapons, sending beams of concentrated energy toward the creature. But the Shadowborn creature was no ordinary adversary. It absorbed the energy, its body twisting to evade the blasts, the beams fading into nothingness before they could make contact. "It's evolving faster than we can keep up," Dr. Evelyn Voss shouted, her voice laced with panic. She had been studying the creature's movements, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were facing. The creature's form seemed to shift with every strike, adapting to their technology, countering their attacks with unnatural precision. "We need to get to the structure," Hale said, her eyes scanning the opening ahead. The glowing portal seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, but it was their only chance. If the ancient structure held the key to defeating the Shadowborn, then it was the only hope humanity had left. With a decisive nod, Hale led the charge, ducking and weaving to avoid the creature's sweeping tendrils. The soldiers followed closely behind, their weapons firing in synchronized bursts. The air was thick with tension, the ground shaking as the Shadowborn creature retaliated with devastating force. It unleashed waves of dark energy, sending shockwaves that knocked soldiers off their feet and sent boulders crashing down around them. "Keep moving," Hale shouted. They were close, but the creature was relentless. It lashed out again, its tendrils sweeping through the air like whips, striking the soldiers with bone-crushing force. One by one, soldiers fell, their bodies disintegrating in bursts of light as the dark energy enveloped them. Dr. Voss stumbled, but was quickly helped up by one of the soldiers. "We can't keep this up," she gasped. "The energy is too strong. We need to reach the core, or everything will be lost." Hale didn't hesitate. She turned and sprinted toward the entrance, the team following in her wake. The creature roared behind them, its fury echoing through the mountain as it continued to unleash its dark power. Every step felt like an eternity, the very ground beneath their feet seeming to resist them, as though the mountain itself was conspiring to keep them from reaching their goal. They reached the entrance just as the creature's shadow enveloped them. Hale ducked into the structure, followed by Voss and the remaining soldiers. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening sound, sealing them inside. The interior was unlike anything they had ever seen, an ancient, almost sacred space, its walls etched with strange symbols that pulsed faintly with a blue light. The air was thick with the energy that had once powered the artifact, now empty and dormant. But at the far end of the room stood a massive altar, upon which lay a crystal, its surface shimmering with an otherworldly glow. "This is it," Voss whispered, awe and fear in her voice. "This is what the Shadowborn were trying to protect." Captain Hale's heart pounded as she approached the altar. The creature's roar echoed through the walls, its shadow looming outside the structure. There was no more time. The crystal was their last hope. "We need to destroy it," Hale said, turning to Dr. Voss. "Is there a way to do it?" Voss nodded, but her expression was pained. "It's not just a power source. It's a conduit, a bridge to their realm. If we destroy it, we'll sever the connection, but the consequences could be catastrophic. We may not survive." Hale met her gaze with determination. "We don't have a choice." As the Shadowborn creature slammed against the outer walls, the team quickly set up the explosives around the crystal. The seconds ticked by, each one feeling like an eternity. The creature's rage grew louder, and the very structure of the mountain seemed to quake as if it were alive. But as they armed the final charge, a cold realization swept over Hale. This was the final battle. The future of humanity rested on their ability to destroy the heart of the darkness, whatever the cost. The structure shook violently, the walls reverberating with the creature's relentless assault. Its roar echoed through the mountain, a sound filled with fury and malice. Outside, the darkness surged against the walls like an ocean, pushing harder with every passing second. Inside, the team worked with precision, placing the final charges around the shimmering crystal that stood at the heart of the ancient structure. The weight of what they were about to do pressed down on them. This was it, the last gamble. Captain Naya Hale stood by the detonator, her breath steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. The soldiers were spread out, guns raised, keeping watch on the shadows that lurked in the periphery. Dr. Evelyn Voss was at the altar, her hands trembling as she adjusted the final piece of the technology that would amplify the blast. She looked at Hale, her expression a mix of determination and fear. "It's done," Voss said, her voice low but firm. "If we set this off, the entire structure will collapse. The explosion will sever the Shadowborn's link to this realm, but it might also tear apart everything around us." "We don't have a choice," Hale replied, her voice cold and resolute. The creature outside had only grown stronger since their arrival, and the entire mountain now seemed to pulse with its malevolent presence. The longer they hesitated, the more likely it was that the creature would breach the structure, and all would be lost. The team had been through hell to get here. Countless battles, treachery, and loss had brought them to this moment. This was humanity's final stand. "Set the charges," Hale ordered, her voice commanding despite the danger that loomed over them. Voss nodded, her fingers working quickly to activate the countdown sequence. There was no turning back now. Outside, the ground trembled once more. The Shadowborn creature was relentless, its dark tendrils stretching toward the structure, testing its defenses. The walls crackled with energy as the creature's fury intensified. The mountain, once a silent monument to an ancient civilization, now felt alive with the power of the darkness it contained. "Ready," Voss called out, her eyes locking onto Hale's. The countdown had begun, but the tension in the air was palpable, like the planet itself was holding its breath. "On my mark," Hale said, gripping her rifle tightly. "We detonate now." The room fell silent as the seconds ticked by. Outside, the shadow of the creature loomed larger, its presence overwhelming, as if it could feel the approaching end. The walls of the structure began to vibrate, a low hum filling the air. Then, as if answering the call of destruction, the creature roared in fury, smashing against the walls with a force that shook the very core of the mountain. Hale's hand hovered over the detonator. The moment had arrived. With a deep breath, she pressed the button. A blinding light erupted from the crystal at the altar, cascading out in a wave of pure white energy. The ground shook as the energy blasted through the structure, sending shockwaves that rocked the mountain and sent the Shadowborn creature into a frenzy. The walls cracked and splintered, the dark energy of the creature fighting back against the brilliant light. But the light was unstoppable, pushing through the dark like a sword of truth cutting through the night. The explosion was deafening. The force of the blast sent the team sprawling to the ground, their bodies slammed by the shockwave as the structure began to collapse around them. Dust and debris filled the air, choking them as they struggled to regain their footing. The crystal had shattered, its power now released into the atmosphere, and the darkness began to recede. The Shadowborn creature, caught in the blast, screamed in agony as its form began to dissipate. The dark tendrils that had once swept across the land writhed and shrank, dissolving into nothingness. The oppressive weight of the darkness lifted, and for the first time in years, the team felt the cold touch of light on their faces. But the cost was high. The entire structure began to crumble, the mountain falling apart as if it were being torn from the inside. Hale barely managed to help Voss to her feet, urging the team to move. "Move, we need to get out, now," Hale shouted. The mountain was coming down around them, but there was no time to look back. The light they had unleashed had driven the Shadowborn away, but at what cost? The structure was collapsing, the planet itself seeming to shudder in the wake of their destruction. As they made their way to the exit, the ground beneath them split open, and the final walls of the mountain began to collapse. The team raced toward the surface, their energy spent, their bodies bruised but alive. The last of the explosives had detonated, sending a final burst of energy into the atmosphere. With one final push, they emerged from the depths of the mountain just as it exploded in a massive eruption of light and energy. The sky above Talos Prime, once dark and oppressive, now gleamed with the brilliance of the light that had been unleashed. The creatures were gone, the shadows had been banished. For the first time in years, humanity could breathe again. As Hale looked to the sky, the realization of their victory began to settle in. They had won, but they had also lost so much in the process. The battle had been hard, but humanity had proven one undeniable truth. No matter how dark the future seemed, the light of their will would always burn brighter. The war was over, and humanity had triumphed.